Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. This podcast episode on talent is split up in 2 parts, and you're listening to the second part. In the first episode, we looked at the definitions of talent, and we looked at a couple of definitions. The first one was that talent is a reduction of errors. When you reduce the errors, you get talent. It's relatively simple. And the second thing that we looked at was this factor of talent being a pattern recognition system. When you know what the pattern is, when someone isolates the pattern for you, when the pattern is really simple, well, now you can do it too. And you can do it with an enormous amount of ease. So those are the 2 parts that we covered in the last episode. But let's go to the third part, which will stop you in your tracks a bit. Let's explore talent from quite another angle. Something that you can't do. So what do we mean by something you can't do? Imagine I told you I was really, really good at washing dishes. So now I'm saying I'm talented at washing dishes. Okay, how about sharpening pencils? Would you consider that a talent? And yet when I say I'm really good at cooking or drawing cartoons, you're instantly interested, aren't you? In effect, talent is only something that you and I can't do. If you can wash dishes and I can wash dishes, then it's not talent. The moment you can do complex maths equations and I can't, hey, now you're talented. Look around you and see what you consider to be talented people. They're just people who are doing things that you can't do. They know how to write programs, they can sing well, or they can dance well. And you can't do it, so suddenly it's a talent. I grew up in Mumbai, and when we were out on the street, we'd have kids speaking different languages. I learned about 6 languages without trying too hard. While I'm not fluent in all of those 6, I can understand and be understood. If you showed up from a country where the only language of instruction was English, then you'd think I was excellent at learning languages. However, on the streets of Mumbai, almost any kid would know more than 2 or 3 languages. It's the same in Europe as well. You'll find that most Europeans on the mainland are fluent in 2 or 3 languages. And they don't think it's something wonderful. They don't see it as a unique talent. Now, if we were to move from the streets to the Olympic Stadium, it's pretty much the same thing there. Put yourself on the starting blocks of any Olympic sport, and almost immediately you start to see how the competitors consider themselves. They don't see this vast gulf of talent. Sure, one athlete may hog most of the medals, but it's not like the athlete is way ahead of the others. They're just marginally faster, often by a few hundredths of a second. And so are you, by the way. You write slightly better than the next person, or slightly worse, as the case may be. But there's one more pretty insidious point, and we have to cover this point. Let's say one person can write, draw, cook, dance, sing, take pictures, is excellent at growing vegetables, can ski very well. And let's say you can't do any of the above. It seems like you chose the short straw in life, right? Like as if you were deprived of something, that when you were born, You were given all these mundane skills that somehow the other person can do really well in half a dozen competencies and still continue to discover more talents along the way. Surely this doesn't sound right, that you got nothing and they got so much. Surely we can't be that deprived. There is no doubt that we all have different brains, but to have such a high inequality of talents seems utterly bizarre. Even so, we've come to believe this untruth, which is where I need to take you down a slight detour of why I feel so passionate about this talent discussion. Back in 2008, I started up a blog on the topic of talent. I had to write things down because the more I discussed this issue of talent, the more people brought up objections. And it's not like they'd stick to a single point either. I'd find the topic would bounce wildly from Michael Phelps to genetics to everything in between. I found it wasn't enough to just write a blog. And so I decided to do something that would prove without a doubt that talent can be acquired in an incredibly short period. The challenge was simple enough. If you walk into a cafe and ask, who's a writer? Who's a singer? Who's a dancer? You'll get some response. Someone will raise their hand. But if you were to ask, who's a cartoonist? The place suddenly goes quiet. So we decided to start up a cartooning course. It wasn't about picking people who could draw. Instead, it was quite the opposite. The challenge was to turn everyone into a cartoonist. Notice, I didn't say anyone, I said everyone. There would be no failure. Every single person in that cafe would become cartoonists if they joined the course. But of course, I had my own membership site at 5000 BC, and so I offered the course free of charge. Today that course costs over $1,000, but back then, I wanted to prove that this crazy goal was possible. And if you look at the work that comes out of the cartooning course, you will frankly be stunned, because I'm stunned. They do such amazing work. And we're not talking about hundreds of hours or thousands of hours. We're talking about nothing, almost nothing, just a few weeks of work. The same concept needed to be applied to article writing or to headlines or copywriting. It wasn't just about getting one or two people talented. That's what a lot of people do. They go, hey, look, these people are the stars. No, everyone has to be talented. I wanted to make sure it was like the training I got on the streets of Mumbai. Everyone was able to speak languages. Everyone needed to have the talent. Everyone needed to have this high level of fluency. It's incredibly hard to believe that talent isn't inborn. We somehow like to believe that we're special. But for the most part, talent is just a reduction of errors. If you find the errors, you can fix them. The fewer errors you make, the better you are at completing a task. Fewer errors result in greater efficiency. Instead of the job just being another mundane task, you're now able to push your limits. So, before I used to take 2 days to write an article, and I had no energy to do much else. Now I can write over 4,000 words in one morning. And I still have energy to find some great stories, to make the article come alive, and all of this I could have never done before. All those errors I used to make back in the year 2000, well, I don't make any of them anymore. And so now I'm a writer, I'm a talented writer. And that's the first point. Talent is a reduction of errors. The second point is simply one of understanding how your brain works. The brain works with patterns. It's all about pattern recognition. You probably couldn't multiply 11 by 24 before you listened to the last podcast, but now you can. And maybe you can't write a sales page without banging your head against the wall, but if you're given a pattern, you will. Any skill can be broken down into smaller bits, and then you can recreate the pattern. Will that make you Michael Phelps? Will that make you Usain Bolt? Will that make you Einstein? No, it won't. There are a lot of other reasons that we're not covering right now. But instead of bringing up objections about why you can't do something, go out there and find the teacher, find the system, find the group, and understand that it's a matter of recognizing the pattern and then executing it. Yes, you can cook food as well as any accomplished chef. You can draw just as well as anyone, and you can make an outstanding presentation. All the limits lie when you don't understand the pattern, when it's not being explained to you, when it's not small enough. The pattern is so much of the talent acquisition process, and we don't have it, and so we struggle with it. Once we're given the pattern, it's easy. It's like a roadmap. How many times do you get lost when Google Maps tells you exactly where to go? If you have a roadmap, you can get there. Finally, the last definition of talent is a closer look at ourselves. A closer look at ourselves in the mirror. How come we got passed up when the next guy got not one, but 12 talents? And how come we consider these gifts to be talents only because we can't do it? If that guy can play the piano and we can't play it, they're talented. But if both of us can play it, then we're not. It's time to ask yourself these hard questions. The concept of inborn talent is like being in a prison. If you believe in innate talent, that's it. You're done. You can't learn anymore. You're stuck forever. Or you can start searching for a teacher, a system, and a group. And you can explore the world like never before. Oh, and yes, I'm really talented at washing dishes. So that brings us to the end of this podcast. What is the one thing that you can do? Well, it's very hard to tell you what you can do because there is so much to do when it comes to the world of talent. But I think the one thing that you can do is to recognize the factor that there's always a teacher, there's always a system, and there's always a group. And all of these three things are very important. And I'll cover more of this in future podcasts. I'm also considering just starting up a podcast on the topic of talent itself. If you're interested in that, write to me at sean@psychotactics.com. Maybe that'll just get me to do the podcast. To tell you the truth, I have been putting off this podcast for over 100 episodes. It's something I wanted to start with. Talent is probably the most interesting thing to me in the world because I see so many people that consider themselves to be not good at this, not good at that, and they don't want to try stuff because, they're gonna fail. Like yesterday, I started speaking Spanish after a very long time. And the first thing that Manuela told me, Manuela is speaking to me from London. She's a client of ours, and she very happily asked me to join her in the conversation. And I struggled. But watch this space, because I'm pretty hopeless at languages. Yes, you heard that right. I just learned the languages I learned back then. And the only way I can learn it is to have a good teacher, a good system, and a good group. And that's really where you need to start looking. You need to start looking for a teacher, not to depend on the fact that you are the person who's going to figure out stuff. Because all the super people on this planet, all the athletes and musicians, and they all have coaches. They have coaches for a reason. It's the coach that's able to see stuff that they're not able to see. So at the end of the day, the one thing that you can do is find a teacher. And the second thing you want to do is find a teacher that doesn't promise you instant success. Now I know this is ironic because I just said that you can learn to draw cartoons very quickly. You can learn to write very quickly. It's true. But when you look at that, it has a very high failure rate because the way they look at it is not everyone. And you have to look at a teacher that guarantees that everyone gets to the end point. Everyone, not just 1 and 2, and those are the testimonials you see, but that everyone gets to the end point. That's the kind of teacher that you want. Now that brings us to the end of this episode. So what's happening in Psychotactics land? Well, last week, one of my clients came from Australia and she visited us. She took us out to dinner and she brought us some gifts. And this takes me back to 2000 and something when I used to listen to Brian Tracy. Back then, I had a Toyota Karin. You probably never heard of that car. And I used to put tapes in the car. And that's what the tapes consisted of. Loads and loads of Brian Tracy speaking about sales and marketing. And I don't think he spoke about marketing. I think he mostly spoke about sales. And when Brian Tracy came to New Zealand, I found out from his secretary what wine he liked and what gifts he would like and stuff. And I went to the airport, found out the flight number, and yes, I stalked him and I gave him those gifts and he was surprised. And then we met. When he made his presentation, I was backstage. He taught me a lot of stuff just in that little time that he was here in New Zealand. And then we went to meet him in the US. And that's what it reminded me about, because this person, she came with gifts and she made that effort to find out what we liked, what we didn't like. And I really think that that generosity is missing today. So many of us think that we'll go and meet someone and we'll buy them a coffee. And I'm not saying this from my perspective. I'm not saying you come and visit me and bring a whole bunch of gifts. I'm saying that you need to find your teacher. You need to find that inspiration. And then you need to make contact with them. I made contact with David Attenborough this year, Jim Collins, who's the author of Good to Great. It wasn't very hard to do. And you just had to be generous. And I think that is the key to making contact with people and to keeping that contact, because they remember people who are really generous rather than those who just want something from you. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to be working on our website, the new website at Psychotactics. I stopped last July and, well, now it's time to get back again and finish off that website. I'm going to be working really hard at it in the time from now to December 20th when we close shop and open in Jan. That's Jan 20th. So we take a whole month off, as you know. This is the 3-month vacation. I'm Sean D'Souza, and thank you for listening. We'll see you in 5000 BC. Bye-bye.